Woo! We got in just in time, didn't we? That weather sounds pretty rough. All right, so tonight what we're going to do is we are going to talk about the Olivet discourses. Many of you have heard of the Olivet discourse. I actually wasn't going to do it, and then Christian asked if I would walk him through this because he had some questions about it. So I told him that he's not been feeling well. I told him he'd better be on watching tonight, so you better be on it. We're going to be going through Matthew chapter 24 and Luke chapter 21, and we're going to be contrasting them. It's often very easy, there's so many similarities in these passages, to confuse them as one discussion. And I've heard a lot of good Bible teachers that have taught that way, that it's all one passage talking about the same thing. And it's really not. And what we've done tonight is we have lined the two passages up side by side, and we're going to be reading both chapters. I'm not going to give a lot of my words because I want you to see exactly what the text has to say to show that they are different passages. They are to different audiences. They're spoken in different places. There's much that's actually different once you compare them or contrast them side by side. I've used this, I don't know what you actually call it, graph? Chart, yeah, in every one of my gospel studies. We went through it in Luke and all of the other ones. It's very important that we understand who wrote which book and why they wrote it and who they wrote it to. And so in this graph, it explains that. Now, we're only going to be dealing tonight with Mark and Luke. We're not going to be dealing with the book of John. We're only going to be using Matthew and Luke. The book of Mark pretty much quotes Matthew's account in Mark 13. And John's account we actually find in Revelation chapter 6. We're coming up to that passage, but we're not there yet. Matthew was a Jew. Remember, he was the tax collector. He was the Levite. When he wrote his book, he was writing it to Jews. And he talked about what Jesus said. Matthew has the most information, the most concise speeches, teachings, preachings of Jesus of any of the Gospels. His greatest sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, that takes a long time to read, it was written by Matthew because he wanted his readers to understand what Jesus said. And he's showing Jesus as the Messiah. But Luke was a Greek. We've been going through the book of Luke and now the book of Acts on our Wednesday night Bible studies. He was a Greek physician. And he was writing to Greeks. He was writing to Gentiles. We've mentioned it several times in our book of Luke and in the book of Acts. It's believed that Luke wrote his epistles as defenses for Paul when Paul was going to go to Rome. We haven't got there yet, but Paul is about to call himself to Caesar. I'm going to plead to Caesar to hear my case. In doing that, he needed documents to prove his case. Up until this point, all of the Jews have been attacking him, throwing him in jail, beating him, and he's trying to show that it's unjust. And so he's going to take his case all the way to Caesar. Well, Luke is writing that case out. As we've seen several times in the book of Acts just recently, he went and was tried, but then found innocent by Gentile believers. Luke is writing to Gentiles. He is writing and showing Jesus not as the Messiah, but as a man. And he shows a lot of what Jesus felt in his gospel, but then he also talks about the promise of the Holy Spirit, like we've been dealing with in Acts. This is very important to know who they're writing to, because it plays great significance when talking about the Olivet discourses. As we're going to see, Matthew and Luke are written by two different people trying to express words by Jesus to two different groups. As we go through these passages, you're going to see that he's talking to different audiences. He's giving it in different locations. He's answering different questions, and he's giving different answers to the questions that have been given. It's two different people groups that are highlighted in tonight's two chapters, and we're going to deal with that. So before we get there, like I said, there's a lot of similarities that we are going to see between these two passages. We have Matthew's account and Luke's account that we're going to be covering tonight. John, that we will be coming to in several weeks, we'll read his account when we get there. But all three of these talk about false Christs, wars, famines, pestilence, death, martyrs, and then global chaos. All of them do. But all of them point in a different direction. Well, I shouldn't say all. Revelation and Matthew point about one discussion, and Luke is pointing to a different one. Although they're talking about the same things, you're going to see that they're talking about two different time periods very blatantly. So let's begin. Luke chapter 21 is the start of his Olivet discourse, and it starts inside the temple. And Jesus looked up and he saw the rich putting their gifts into the treasury, and he saw also a certain poor widow putting in 2 mites. So he said, "Truly I say to you that this poor widow has put in more than all of the rest." Verse 4. "For all of these put out of their abundance have put in offerings for God, but she out of her poverty put in all the livelihood that she had." Verse 5. "Then as some spoke of the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and donations, Jesus said," now I want to pull over and I want to show you what Matthew says about the same report. "Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him to show him the buildings of the temple." At first, they're in the temple watching the little lady, the little widow, put in all that she had. Okay, that's where the first discussion takes place. This next discussion takes place and is recorded when Jesus is outside the temple on the Mount of Olives looking back. Okay? Verse 6 of Luke chapter 21. "These things which you see, the days will come in which not one stone shall be left upon another that shall be not thrown down." And in Matthew, "And Jesus said to them, Do you not see all these things? Assuredly I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." Sounds very similar, right? Except, again, this is 2 different locations. One's from inside the temple, one's from outside the temple. Let's continue. Verse 7. "So they asked him, saying, Teacher," this is Luke, "but when will these things be? And what sign will there be when these things are about to take place?" In the Luke passage, notice the questions. When will these things be? What things? When all of the stones will be toppled and not one on top of each other, right? That's what they're asking. And what sign will there be when these things are about to take place? How do we know that occasion is coming, right? Now look at the Matthew account. "And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives," not in the temple, "the disciples came to him privately." The other one, this is not a private discussion. The Luke discussion is in front of everybody in the temple. They asked him, and he gives a public discourse in front of the temple. But on the Mount of Olives, his disciples come to him privately. Now this takes place quite a bit. There's many times, and I remembered to do it when I started the lesson, but I didn't write it down, and so I forgot to catalog them. But there's a number of discussions that Jesus has. It's particularly in the book of Matthew, I might add, where Jesus gives a sermon or a discussion in front of everybody, and then the disciples come up to him later and say, "What did you mean by that?" We didn't get that. Why are you talking in parables? And then Jesus explains it to them. The kingdom parables, for example, is one of those occasions. They came up to Jesus afterwards. Peter asked, "What are you talking about?" Okay, so this is the similar idea. The first one in Luke, he's at the temple. The second one, the disciples come to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall the sign of thy coming and the end of the world?" That's not the same question that they asked in Luke. Completely different. The first one, when's the building going to fall down, and how do we know it's coming? This other one says, when are these things going to be? When will you come, and when will the end be? So Jesus isn't going to give them the same answer for different questions. They're very specific. Okay, continuing. Luke chapter 8. And he said, take heed that you not be deceived, for many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and the time has drawn near. Therefore, do not go after him. Jesus said in Matthew 24, and Jesus answered and said to them, take heed that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. Okay? Sounds similar, doesn't it? But remember, these answers are two different directions, two different time periods, and in two different locations to two different sets of people. Verse 9. He's explaining to when the building is going to fall down. When you hear of wars and commotions, do not be terrified, for these things must come to pass first, but the end will not come immediately. Then he said to them, nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. Notice Matthew. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. Sounds similar. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. Notice that's two different times. The first one, they must come to pass first. This has to happen. Wars and rumors of wars, commotions happens first. Then this takes place. But then in Matthew, he says, these things must come to pass, but the end isn't yet. See what I mean? It's two different discussions. The one has to happen, then that takes place. These happen, and then it's not yet. Verse 11 of Luke. And there will be great earthquakes in various places, and famines and pestilences, and there will be some fearful sights and great signs from the heavens. Finishing verse 7 of Matthew 24. And there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. All of these things are the beginning of sorrows. Okay? Matthew talks about the beginning. All of these things are birth pains. Right? They come before the birth. Let's continue. But in Luke, he says, before all these things. Go back just one for me, Daniel. Matthew, he says, all of these are the beginning of sorrows. That means they have to happen. They're going to happen, and that's the beginning. But Luke, he says, before these things take place, they will lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and prisons. You will be brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake, but it will turn out for you as an occasion for testimony. In Matthew, he says, then they will deliver you up to tribulation, completely different than what he said in Luke, and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations. Who's in Luke, who's hating on them?
The synagogues.
Yeah. He's saying in Luke, the Jews are going to hate you. Sad part is, he's talking to Jews, believers, but Jews. You're going to be delivered up to prisons and synagogues. In other words, your own people are going to be the ones that hate on you. But in Matthew, he says, they're going to deliver you up to tribulation. They're going to kill you for my name's sake, but by all nations. This is worldwide now. You beginning to see the difference? It's quite a contrast. Verse 10, and then after all these things, many will be offended, will betray one another, and will hate one another. You see the difference? Before all things, and then after these things take place, after these birth pains, then some really bad stuff's going to happen. All nations, your own countrymen and family members. Daniel chapter 12 verse 1, at that time Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. And at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book. Jeremiah chapter 30 verse 7, alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it, and and it is the time of Jacob's trouble, and he shall be saved out of it. Continuing in Matthew chapter 24, verse 11. Then, remember this is after these things, right? Then many false prophets will arise and deceive many. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. Going back to Luke. Therefore settle in your hearts not to meditate beforehand on what you will answer. For I will give you a mouth and wisdom which all your adversaries will not be able to contradict or resist. You will be betrayed even by parents and brothers, relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake. But not a hair of your head shall be lost. By your patience possess your souls. You know what's interesting? He goes through all of that, and you can see the early church. All of the disciples going before rulers and leaders. All of them but John dying a martyr's death. And that's exactly what took place. Families betrayed each other. How sad. Matthew 24, going back. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. Notice he doesn't say that in Luke. In Luke, he doesn't say anything about all of the nations. He says you're going to go before synagogues and they're going to kill you. And it's going to be your family that's the ones that are going to betray you. But in Matthew, he talks about the entire world being a witness and the gospel being preached. Completely different. Two different focuses. Luke chapter 21, verse 20. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are in the midst of her depart, and let not those who are in her country enter her. What was Jesus answering for the people in the temple in Luke? Destruction of the temple. And so what he warns them of in the temple is he says, listen, when you see Jerusalem surrounded, you know it's time and you better get out of there. Notice what he says in Matthew, though. It's different. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, and that's in quotes, spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to... Uh-oh, did I cut that off? I must have. I apologize. It's supposed to be flee to the mountains. I apparently cut off that last line. Yeah, that's okay. You couldn't see it. It was behind my head anyway. Notice the two different triggers, though. Okay? The one is Jerusalem surrounded, about to be destroyed, desolate. The other one is when you see the abomination of desolation that Daniel spoke about in the prophets. They knew exactly what he was talking about. In 168 AD, the Greek king, who was Antiochus IV Epiphanes, he invaded Jerusalem and he captured the city. But he didn't just capture the city. He went into the temple, he took everything out of the temple, and then he put a bust of the statue of the god Zeus inside the Holy of Holies. And he sacrificed a pig on top of the altar inside the Holy of Holies. He did this to get rid of the Jews, for one. He wanted them to become polytheistic instead of monotheistic. That didn't happen because immediately the people revolted and it became a massive war. It's called the Maccabean Revolt, the Maccabean Wars. And they revolted against him. Let me just read my notes because they're rather extensive. The following is pretty much a quote from Chuck Missler. But anyways, this is what he says on this section. Only the high priest can enter the Holy of Holies once a year, and only on the great day of the ceremonial feast for preparation that's called Yom Kippur. It's only the high priest to go in there once a year, and only for the salvation of the Jewish people. What took place there was the salvation for all the Greeks. And of course, he sacrificed a pig, an unkosher animal. When Antiochus did this, he was an eccentric, unpredictable, unreliable, cruel, and tyrannical person. If you were circumcised, you were executed. If you had a copy of the Torah, you were executed. It's funny, he called himself Epiphanes, which means the God who reveals himself, and everybody called him Epinomes because that means you're a crazy man. They used to play on words. But regardless, he believed that he was showing himself to be God. The book of Daniel foreshadows a final world ruler in chapter 11 from verses 36 through 40. Jesus was talking about this in Matthew 24 in relation to what would happen at the end. Let me see. He stopped Sabbath observances, stopped circumcisions, and if you're circumcisions, that was going to be a terrible pun. Never mind. I'm glad I stopped that one.
Skip over that.
Yeah. If you have a copy of the Torah, you were killed on the 15th of Kislev in December 168 BC. He broke his agreement with the leadership in Jerusalem, and he celebrated his birthday by having this pig sacrificed. 3 years later, just 3 years. Remember, he was a Greek leader. Within 3 years, on his birthday, he was killed and they lost the war. That's how bad. I mean, literally, the Jews were so upset by it, they would have died to the last man to kill him and get rid of the abomination that took place. That's how bad it was. Let's see. What's interesting is 40 AD, so literally just a few years after Jesus gives this discussion, Caligula. Do you remember Caligula, the emperor in Caesar? He was a really good moral guy, right?
Please do not find your details.
Yeah, no. He was a bad guy. Okay? He wanted to do the same thing Antiochus did. So he gave an order to his general Petronius to go put a bust of him in the temple. But Petronius knew his history. And he said if we do that, there's going to be war. So the Roman general disobeyed Caligula, that really bad guy, and didn't put it in there. Caligula found out that he disobeyed, and he wrote out an order that Petronius would be executed for disobeying, and that his image would be placed in the temple anyway. There was a mishap at sea as it was traveling, and the letter was delayed. In the process of the letter being delayed, Caligula died. So that the news of Caligula's death got to Petronius before the execution order. So when the execution order came, it was null and void because Caligula was dead. God saved his life. That would have been a terrible experience. The deaths that would have taken place. I mean, it would have been awful. And of course, then not long after that, another 30 years, Titus Vespasian came in and he destroyed the temple, carried it away, burnt it down, took off the menorah and took it to Rome. But what he didn't do was he didn't set up any other image to any other god or himself there. That was only what Antiochus did. And the Lord, speaking about it, talks about it here in Matthew chapter 24. I wanted to go into detail of that because it is important. All right, so let's get back to, I skipped it. Luke chapter 21, verse 22. For these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. Matthew 24, he says, let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house, and let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. Excuse me. Verse 23 of Luke, but woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing babes in those days, for there will be great distress on the land and wrath on the people. Remember, this is the destruction of the temple. When you see the temple surrounded, run. And you better hope you're not pregnant at the time or nursing. What he says in Matthew is, but woe to those who are pregnant and those who are of nursing babes, and pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath. Why would anybody care that it would be on the Sabbath?
They can't leave.
They wouldn't be able to leave. They would only have a Sabbath day's journey. My dad told this. I didn't know this when I did my study. But apparently the Essenes were so particular about the length in which they would have a Sabbath day's walk. They were very particular about where they went to the bathroom, okay? And they would take a shovel with them like the scripture said. The problem is, the distance that you had to go outside the camp to go to the bathroom was further than what you could go on a Sabbath day's journey. So you know what they did? They held it all Sabbath day until Monday morning or Sunday morning, and then they went out. That's how particular they were. And this is why it's important. Because Matthew is not talking about the Jews at the fall of the temple. He's talking about a later date at the end of time. When they see this abomination of desolation, they better hope that they see it when it's not on a Sabbath day and they've got to obey the Sabbath day laws. I mean, I'll be honest, when I was there on the Sabbath day, the elevators, you had to walk because they figured you pushing the button on the elevator was breaking the Sabbath. That's work. You imagine how bad that would be? Nobody driving, trying to get out of Israel, getting out of Jerusalem, millions of people. It'd be bad. It'd be real bad. Luke chapter 21, verse 24. And they will fall by the edge of the sword, and they will be led away captives into, notice, all nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So remember, you see Israel or Jerusalem surrounded, run for it. Get out now while you can. The buildings fall down, everybody's going to be killed by the sword. 1.5 million of them, as a matter of fact, between the sword and famine afterwards. I mean, they were lifting up, I've got pictures of where they were lifting up tiles under the road where families were hiding. And they would lift up the tiles and they'd take their spears and they would kill them all underneath, just trying to hide from them. I mean, that's how bad it was. There was Eusebius, early church historian, in book 3, chapter 5, verse 1. He says that the Christians took the book of Luke. Remember, he's writing to Gentiles. The Christians took the book of Luke's rendition of the Olivet discourse. There was a prophet that said, Jerusalem is surrounded, we need to leave. Without being in a rush, they gathered all of their things and they moved to the city of Pella. And not a single, they saw the nation or the city of Jerusalem surrounded. They had this prophecy. They gathered their stuff. In the meantime, the emperor dies. When the emperor dies, Titus's father goes to take the spot as Caesar. And so the siege on Jerusalem is paused for 3 months. In the meantime, Titus Vespasian's father does take the throne in Rome. But during that 3 months, the Christians that had heard the prophecy and knew this passage got out and went to Pella. After they got out, Titus got message to go back and destroy Jerusalem, and that's exactly what he did, killing 1.5 million Jews that day. In those days, I should say. Drastically different, but because they listened and obeyed, they were spared. Notice also, Luke fast forwards in time dramatically. He goes from essentially 70 AD to being spread all over the nations, and then for Jerusalem to be a city again and to be trampled by Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. That verse takes up 2,000 years. Okay? That's a long time period. But you can see it throughout history. It's all written there. They're killed. They're expelled. They come back. But the Gentiles are still in control. And some would say that even though Israel came back as a nation in 48, in 67 they took back Jerusalem, or at least parts of it, in the Temple Mount. Some would say they're still trampled underfoot. I dare say we're going to find the answer to that probably in the next couple of days, depending on what happens with this war. We're going to see. So, anyways, let's continue. Matthew 24, verse 23. Then if anyone says to you, look, here's the Christ, or there, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. Who are the elect? The Jews. The Jews were the people that were elect to share the gospel, and they failed to do so. Jesus says, see, I have told you beforehand. By the way, he says, if you see anybody or hear anybody that says that they're Christ, don't believe them. Anyone that claims to be Jesus standing on this earth ain't him. Don't follow him. Even if he shows great signs and wonders, even if he can raise the dead, don't believe him. Because Jesus isn't here yet. When he comes back to step foot on this earth, he's going to open his mouth and all of his enemies are going to be wiped out. It's going to be a bad day on earth for the enemies. Okay? Matthew 24, verse 26. Therefore, if they say to you, look, he is in the desert, do not go out. We'll get into it, but it's very specific what he says here. And he's talking about end times. Talking about a Messiah coming. Where's the first place that he warns them not to look for? If he's coming out of the desert. In probably 3 weeks, maybe 4, we're going to talk about a person called the Mahdi. And he is the Messiah that comes out of the desert. And believe me, folks, you don't want to follow him. Okay? It's interesting that Jesus said that one first. Look, he is in the inner rooms. Do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. For wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. Like I said, when Jesus shows back up and he starts war, and his enemies are destroyed, eagles are carrion. They come and they eat dead prey. Yeah. Where there's going to be all these carcasses, the eagles will show up. That's at least my take of the verse. There's other people that take different, but regardless, it's going to be a bad day for his enemies. We'll continue in Matthew 29, as we've been reading there. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of heavens will be shaken. Notice what he says. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the days that he just talked about, the sun. Now, verse 25 of Luke 21, Luke does essentially the same thing, because remember, he's just fast-forwarded 2,000 years in history. He's now talking about the end times as well. And there will be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars and on the earth, distress of nations, with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's heart failing them for fear and from expectation of those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven will be shaken. Verse 27, then they will see the Son of Man coming in the cloud with power and great glory. Now when these things begin to happen, look up and lift up your heads, because your redemption draws near. I read that last week as in preparation for this. Matthew 24, verse 30, then the sign of the Son of Man, notice it says the Son of Man in both of these passages now, drawing the two together, will appear in the heavens. And all of the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Verse 31, and he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather his elect from the four winds and from one end of heaven to the other. Again, who's his elect? We're the bride, not the elect. It's different. Verse 32. Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and put forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So you also, when you see all of these things, know that it's near at the doors. And Luke says it this way. Then he spoke to them a parable. Look at the fig tree and all of the trees. When they are already budding, you see and know for yourselves the summer is now near. So you also, when you see these things happening, know that the kingdom of God is near. One thing that I hadn't really understood, I knew that the fig tree is used as an image of Israel throughout the scriptures. I did not realize that all of the other trees are used as the original 70 nations that came out from Noah. I didn't realize that, and from Noah's sons. And so when you notice what Luke says, Luke, again, who's he writing to? He's not writing to just Jews. He's writing to Gentiles as well. He's writing to the Gentiles, and look what he says. He says, look at the fig tree and all the trees. Not just the Jews, but everyone. When they come to bloom and you see all these things happening around the world, then you know. But notice how Matthew says it, because he's just writing to the Jews. He doesn't say, and all of the trees. He just says the fig tree. It's specific, but it's there. Verse 32 of Luke. Assuredly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. And then Matthew 24:34. Assuredly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. But of that day and the hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but the Father only. Verse 37. But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark in Genesis chapter 6. And did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So also will the coming of the Son of Man be. Then 2 men will be in the field, and one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken, the other left. Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. And why do I have that in there twice? I have no idea. I was only supposed to have that once. Sorry. Oh, no, I didn't. Okay. I'm right. Verse 43. But know this, that if the master of the house had known at what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore, you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour that you do not expect. Who then is a faithful and wise servant, whom his master made ruler over his household, to give them food in due season? Blessed is the servant, whom his master, when he sees come, will find so doing. Assuredly, I say to you, that he will make him ruler over all of his goods. Then going back to Luke, we're pretty close to being done, actually. Luke chapter 21, verse 33. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. But take heed to yourselves, lest your hearts be weighed down with carousing, drunkenness, and the cares of this life, that the day come on you unexpectedly. For it will come as a snare on those who dwell on the face of the whole earth. You'll notice as we go through Revelation coming up in the subsequent chapters, because now that we've cut out and we've dealt with all these little things around, now when we go back, it kind of gives a better light of Revelation. And you'll see something very specific. You'll see it'll be in the old language, it's called earth dwellers. It's those that dwell on the earth. It's people whose focus is not on earthly things, it's on earth. It's not on heavenly things, it's on earthly things. It's all of these things he just mentioned, carousing and drunkenness, and marrying and giving in marriage, and just preoccupied by daily life with no paying attention of what's to come. And this is kind of what Luke mentions here, talking about those who dwell on the face of the whole earth. These people are just focused on this life with no paying attention of what's to come, and it's detriment to them. Verse 36, watch therefore and pray always that you may be counted worthy to escape all of these things that will come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man. And in the daytime he was teaching in the temple. Notice again, he's talking about the temple. But at night he went out and stayed on the mount called Olivet. Then early in the morning all of the people came to him in the temple to hear him. And then Matthew 24 verse 13, but he who endures to the end shall be saved. I'm a pre-wrath guy. And notice what he says here in Luke. Watch therefore and pray that you always may be counted worthy to escape all of these things that will come to pass. We're not a people appointed to wrath, and I believe if we are counted worthy, we will be taken away. But notice what he told the Jews in Matthew. But he who endures endures to the end shall be saved. In other words, he ain't getting out of it. It's going to be bad. Okay? So repent now. Get it right. No carousing. I say it jokingly, but I could not be more serious. I'd be a terrible pastor if I was. Go to here. Again, you could see they both talked about wars, famines, pestilence, earthquakes, etc. But the one talked about before all of these things take place, you're going to see these things. And then the other one said after you see all these things take place, then it happens. Again, it's just the two different sides. And Daniel, go to that last one. No, second to last. I apologize. Again, you see the one, they talk about the same things Luke does and Revelation does. But the Revelation and Matthew are combined, where Luke is talking about the church. And then go to the last one now, Daniel. And so when you kind of graph it out, this is my best attempt to graphing it out. You have the fall of Jerusalem that Luke is talking about. The people left. You had the 7 churches that are mentioned. And then you had wars, famines, etc. All of those. The abomination of desolation. But for Matthew, you have all of these things first. Then you have the abomination of desolation. Then you have that great tribulation and the time of Jacob's trouble that they cannot avoid. If they are not believers by then. So I hope that once you saw them in contrast, side by side, I hope it helped you see. They're talking about 2 different times to do 2 different people, to 2 different focuses. And we already skipped the passage in Luke. We're much too late for that. So we need to be prepared for what we see in the book of Matthew for the Olivet discourse. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. It really does mean the world to me that you're getting a blessing out of it. If this video was a blessing, make sure to hit that thumbs up button for me. That way other people can find it as well. Here in the link section, you'll find playlists and new videos that we put out. We try to do 2 or 3 a week. You can also subscribe to the channel by pressing on my face and then hitting the bell icon, and that will alert you to new videos. May God richly bless you.